history, and America's godly heritage. We talk about anything that affects your faith, your family, or your freedom. So don't go anywhere, because Point of View starts right now.
Across America, live, this is Point of View. And now, Kerby Anderson.
Thank you for joining me today here on Point of View. First hour, got kind of an open line. In second hour, we're going to be doing an in-studio interview, and I thought it would be a good time as we get a little bit closer to Labor Day to look once again at the presidential election and to give you some perspective on that, and also to get your comments. A little bit later this hour, I'm going to be talking about the real concern that we have about whether or not President Obama and his administration is going to, and essentially is going to, turn the internet over to the United Nations. What does that mean if globalists now control the internet? And would they be able to censor some things? We're going to be sending out some material tonight that you can respond to, and we'll spend some more time talking about it tomorrow. It's an action alert that we'll be focusing on, so that is another issue that certainly we want to bring to you. But let's, if we can, kind of look at these polls for just a minute. And the latest poll shows that Donald Trump has been able to chip away at the lead of Hillary Clinton. This is something that still shows her in the lead over him. But I think it's interesting that now, if you take the latest NBC News Survey Monkey weekly election tracking poll, all these names just crack me up sometimes, now she has a lead of just 6 points, whereas she had 8 points before. 48% supporting Hillary Clinton, 42% supporting Donald Trump. That is significant, and it is also a little bit inaccurate, because what it does is look at just simply two candidates. Let's remind ourselves, how many times have I said this? We have third-party candidates this time that are going to make a difference. And if you look at a four-way general election matchup, that changes significantly. So the first thing I want to teach you is, if you see these polls, pay attention to them, but have some discernment, because when they then actually have a matchup with the four candidates, and I'll explain who those are, that lead now is only 4%. It has Hillary Clinton at 41%, Donald Trump at 37%, but then the Libertarian candidate, former Governor Gary Johnson, at 11% now. I mean, if his percentage goes up just a few more percentage points, he actually could be on the stage, and that would be the first time we've had three on a stage since Ross Perot. And then Jill Stein went up from 3% to 5%. Now, that may change. As I have pointed out on more than one occasion, right now some people talk about voting for a third-party candidate, but as it get closer to November, maybe some of them begin to say, no, that's just going to be throwing my vote away. But the point is that you can actually very clearly say that the election of George W. Bush was due in large part to the fact that a very significant number, 2.5% or 19, whatever, well, I'll just use that percentage right now, rather than get into all the numbers, was enough for George W. Bush to win over Al Gore in the state of Florida. Just look at Florida alone. That was enough. If you look at the impact that Ross Perot, with his 19 million votes, made in 1992, there are pretty good evidence that it's quite possible Bill Clinton might have beaten George Herbert Walker Bush anyway, but it made it much easier and much more likely because Ross Perot was in there. So third-party candidates sometimes have an impact. In one case, elected Bill Clinton. In another case, elected George W. Bush. And so ask Al Gore or ask George Herbert Walker Bush if they lost because of a third-party candidate, and they would say, yes, we did. Now, that being said, one other point that I think is important to make is that when we talk about some of this polling, there is what is called the Bradley effect, and that was given to it years ago when in 1982, the Los Angeles mayor Tom Bradley, when he ran, actually lost, even though there was a majority of individuals that said that they were going to vote for him. Now, actually, some voters told the pollsters that they were undecided or they were going to vote for Bradley because they didn't want to say that they were going to vote against the black candidate. That affected Barack Obama's candidacy, and I'm thinking it could possibly affect the issue of Hillary Clinton. When asked, do you want to vote for the first woman to serve as president, even if you're thinking you're not going to vote for her, you might necessarily be tempted sometimes to say that you are. Or, on the other hand, because of the way in which the media has portrayed Donald Trump, even if you are thinking in your heart of hearts, I'm going to vote for Donald Trump, maybe I don't want to say that to a pollster. So there is the possibility that these polls are accurate as far as the people are honest, but they aren't necessarily helpful in terms of predicting what the future might bring. That being said, a lot of that is going to get locked into place, I think, by next month. You have your first debate on September 26th at Hofstra University in New York. And if there's ever been a chance to change people's minds about Hillary Clinton or Donald Trump, that may be one of those places. But again, Hillary Clinton owes her possible success as the next president of the United States due to what has been called the blue wall. What do we mean by that? Well, if you go back and look at the last 6 presidential elections, and you look at those blue states that have consistently voted for the Democrats, you have 18 states plus the District of Columbia. If you add those up and assume that as people have voted in the past are going to vote in the future, that means that Hillary Clinton sort of starts the campaign with 242 electoral votes. You only need 270 to win the presidency, which also ultimately means she only has to pick off 28 other electoral votes from some of these key battleground states, and that makes her the next president. This is not good news for Donald Trump. It's not good news for anybody that might have been nominated by the Republican Party, because you also have seen over the last couple of years that some of these states that used to be strongholds, like Virginia, North Carolina, Colorado, have sort of drifted. And so I'd love to hear from some of you that are in these states. North Carolina right now has, of course, it has 15 electoral votes. And this is a state that has to vote for Donald Trump if he has any chance of winning. Georgia was a state that most everybody assumed would vote for Donald Trump, since Georgia routinely has pretty much voted for the Republican candidate. But those 16 electoral votes are much more up for grabs than they were in the past. For those of you that are living in the state of Arizona, I'd love to hear from you as well, because this has been in some kind of transformation. But again, you have Republican senators from Arizona like John McCain, and those 11 electoral votes you would assume are going to go to Donald Trump. But now there's a big question about both Arizona and Virginia and Georgia in ways that people probably did not expect. And then for those of you in Pennsylvania, those are 20 electoral votes. It's kind of been the cornerstone of the blue wall. But if Donald Trump is going to shake up the electoral map, he's got to figure out a way maybe he can actually win in Pennsylvania. And of course, most importantly, for those of you in the state of Ohio, 18 electoral votes in the Buckeye State. Very, very key. Florida and Ohio, I think in many cases, may really determine, if it's a close election, who is the president. Of course, there's quite possibility that it will be a landslide instead. But 18 electoral votes in Ohio, 29 electoral votes in Florida. You tell me who wins those particular states, and I could pretty much tell you who the next president of the United States might be. So it would be required that Donald Trump has to win both Ohio and Florida, but it's probably unlikely he wins Pennsylvania, and so now he's got to pick off some other states, and that could be Michigan, Wisconsin. Let's take a break. If you'd like to join us as we've talked about the presidential campaign, 1-800-351-1212. And we're going to move to the question of the internet. All that coming up right after this.
This is Viewpoints with Kerby Anderson.
Doubt is something that we all face, and all of us have doubts, but these shouldn't lead to confusion, hopelessness, and unbelief. Doubts can often deepen our dependence on God and give us empathy for others. Pastor Bobby Conway was on my radio program recently to talk about his new book, Doubting Towards Faith, The Journey to Confident Christianity. Sean McDowell wrote the foreword to the book, and he was also on my radio program recently and talked about doubt. Bobby Conway reminds us that there are different forms of doubt: emotional doubt, intellectual doubt, volitional doubt, and evidential doubt. He also has 2 chapters on the doubt triggers in our world today. These range from questions about alleged contradictions in the Bible to moral and ethical questions found in the Bible. And he reminds us that Jesus can handle our doubts. After all, Thomas had questions and doubts. Jesus did not condemn him, but answered his questions and provided evidence for his doubts. In the foreword and his radio interview with me, Sean McDowell shared how doubts first hit him as a college student. He sat down with his father to share his doubts. Josh McDowell responded, I think it's great that you want to find truth. This actually gave Sean room to pursue his questions and resolve his doubts. It allowed him to make the faith of his parents his own faith. He discovered that doubts don't have to be the end of faith. They can often be the impetus for the development of a deeper, more genuine faith. And of course, you have to be intentional in your search for truth. So I would say that if you have doubts or know someone who has doubts, this is an excellent book to read and pass on to others. It is well written and immensely practical. And as some of us have said, we wish we had this book when we were growing up and asking good questions that few, if any, seemed to be able to answer. I'm Kerby Anderson, and that's my point of view.
Take Kerby and the Point of View team with you on the go with the Point of View app. Search for Point of View Radio at the Apple or Google Play stores.
You're listening to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
To join a conversation, 1-800-351-1212. Open line the first hour here. And I did want to just remind you of a presidential campaign. We don't spend a lot of time talking about it because, after all, I think you just get worn out. I know I do. But at the moment, the lead for Hillary Clinton has dropped, and the possibility that Donald Trump, at least in the popular vote, could do much better, not only has increased, but also is more significant in a four-way race, which suggests that a Hillary Clinton, Donald Trump, Gary Johnson, Jill Stein race is maybe a little different than how many of the pollsters are dealing with this particular issue. So, well, if you want to join us on that topic, or maybe even report what you think is happening in your own state, the big surprises, of course, have been in Colorado, in Virginia, and, of course, in Georgia. Who would have thought that Georgia would be that competitive? But that's the reality of what we have. Let me focus a little bit on the internet here, because this is something we're going to encourage you to take action on, and then we'll get into Colin Kaepernick. If nothing else, he's decided to sit during, of course, the national anthem, and now stories coming out about more NFL players that are going to be sitting down as well. This is going to last for quite a while, I suspect. And then I'll get into some other things that we're learning about what is happening in the European Union and how many are saying we just don't need borders anymore. As a matter of fact, the head of the European Union declared that borders are the worst invention ever made by politicians, and maybe some things on gun control that have surfaced as well. But one of the things we're going to encourage you to take action on is the fact that President Obama and his administration are preparing to give away the United States control of the internet. That will happen at the end of next month, and it is going to be important because we, in the past, have been able to guarantee a free flow of information. If you look at some of the countries around the world, and I'm not just talking about repressive regimes, although that certainly is the case when you look at Burma or Myanmar, as well as China, but even free countries have sometimes limited certain things that are allowed on the internet. And so, again, I think we have to pay attention to some of this as well. So let me read a few pieces just to kind of help you understand why we're going to encourage you to take some action on this item. Gordon Kravitz, writing in the Wall Street Journal, said that when the Obama administration announced its plan to give up U.S. protection of the Internet, it promised the United Nations would never take control. But because of the administration's naivete or arrogance, the UN control is likely a result if the United States gives up the stewardship as planned on midnight September 30th. On Friday, Americans for Limited Government received a response from its Freedom of Information Act asking for all records related to legal and policy analysis concerning antitrust issues, and then it goes into all the Internet issues. And basically, the administration says, well, we don't have any of that. So it goes on to say it's shocking the administration admits it has no plans on how this body called ICANN retains its antitrust exemption. And that means that a lot of this could very easily be turned over to the United Nations. Without the U.S. contract, ICANN could seek to be overseen by another governmental group so as to keep the antitrust exemption. And as a result, this is why some people are thinking that the Internet will now be controlled by these globalists at the United Nations. If that doesn't bother you, maybe you don't spend much time on the Internet. But most of us, if we use computers, depend heavily upon the Internet. And even those of you that are listening that don't have computers, don't go on the Internet, you benefit from the Internet free flow of information that appears not only on this program, but on all sorts of other programs and the way in which commerce is done and the rest. And so this is a source of some concern, and one of the reasons why we will be sending to you tonight something that you can receive and your email. If you're receiving email from us regularly, we will get that to you, and we are asking for your response to your members of Congress and to other individuals. It's a petition that simply says Congress has twice ordered the National Telecommunications and Information Administration not to let the government contract that gives them oversight over the Internet Assigned Numbers Authority to lapse. The administration from President Obama is moving ahead with their plan to end U.S. oversight of the Internet anyway. The only option left is for either the House, the Senate, or both to sue the administration to block this from happening. As one of your constituents, I ask you to do everything within your power to push congressional leadership to initiate a lawsuit right away. A court order appears to be the only recourse left to prevent this oversight from being transferred to a multilateral body, or in many cases, what many people believe is the United Nations. Just before we take a break and I take some of your phone calls, let me read from Curtis Ellis. This is an article that appeared in WorldNet Daily. Curtis Ellis was on a while back to talk about the Trans-Pacific Partnership with us, TPP, and we, of course, talked about that on the program. But he asks a very good question. Will the United Nations gain control over the Internet under Barack Obama's giveaway plan? He said that is a question being asked around Washington, D.C. right now. The Wall Street Journal answered this in an explosive article, An Internet Giveaway to the United Nations. And I just read you portions of that. And we've posted the entire article on the website. We posted it yesterday. We've posted it again. So I would encourage you to read it in its entirety. But Curtis Ellis goes on to say that the administration argues that the transition will have no practical effect on how the Internet operates. But Judith Bergman of the Gatestone Institute disagrees. Pointing to the United Nations Geneva Declaration of Principles, which clearly lays out the UN's designs on taking over the Internet, Bergman argues that the giveaway could spell the end of the current era of free speech on the Internet as well as free enterprise. Authoritarian governments around the world bolster Bergman's case. China issued a statement saying it's necessary to ensure that the United Nations plays a facilitating role in setting up international public policies pertaining to the Internet. Russians weighed in saying, we consider it necessary to consecutively increase the role of governments of the Internet governance with strengthening the activity of the International Telecommunications Union in the field and the development of ethical aspects of the Internet use. Let me just stop for a minute. When you have China and the United Nations and Russia all saying, yes, this is what we need to do, take over the control of the Internet, you have to be concerned. You can't believe that this is going to be business as usual. And all you have to do is look at some of the comments that have been made by members of Congress. Senator Ted Cruz, Senator Mike Lee, and Senator Jim Langford report that the board of directors of the group that currently oversees the Internet will consider language for the bylaws of the organization that will put international human rights as a prime consideration of the organization. And in a letter that they sent to the U.S. Secretary of Commerce, they argue that this would open the door to the regulation of content. Inclusion of such commitment would unquestionably be outside the historic mission of an organization whose function was supposedly very limited to the names and numbers and protocol parameters which are way down in the plumbing of the Internet. You know, if you want to start a website, you have to check with what's called ICANN to make sure that there is someone else that does not have that particular name, that particular designation. And that's really all that it does, just to make sure that nobody gets in the way of anybody else. But there's no oversight body saying, well, we're not going to allow you to begin to publish information that we disagree with that might be seen as, anti-homosexual or violate human rights. And that's why, in some respects, the freedom of the Internet is something we've never, ever been able to see before. And now the question is whether we're going to see it evaporate very, very quickly. Yet even with these legal concerns, interestingly enough, this article by Curtis Ellis, he says the Obama administration continues to plunge forward to turn the keys of the Internet over to an obscure, not-for-profit, tax-exempt organization based in California when the clock strikes 12 on September 30th, 2016. So this is one of the reasons we wanted to educate you about the issue and encourage you to be looking for that particular email that will land in your inbox perhaps tonight as we have a chance to get it out to you. We'll spend some time throughout this week talking about why we think this is a very significant concern and why you need to take action and encourage your members of Congress to consider filing a lawsuit to prevent this from taking place. Lots more we're going to talk about today. Let me change topics again, but if you have any comments so far about the presidential campaign or about the turning over of the authority of the Internet to a group of individuals that have globalist intentions, like the United Nations and others, then I think you certainly understand why that's an important issue, and we'd love to get your comments. We come back, though, we're going to get into a couple of other topics that certainly are necessary for and needed for our attention. But if you'd like to join us, feel free to give us a call. That number is 1-800-351-1212. An open line for your comments today on these topics and others. If you'd like to read more about some of the things we've been talking about, you can find them on our webpage, pointofview.net. Let's take a break. We'll be back with more right after this.
There is a big incentive to pay your electric bill. If you don't, you find yourself in the dark. But who pays to make sure you're educated on the key issues of the day, to bring you wisdom for life at work, at home, and in the culture, like you hear from guests here on Point of View? Who makes sure that our electric bill gets paid? You're way ahead of me, aren't you? That's right. You do. The truth is, if every listener this week gave just $5, we could pay our bills for about the next 3 years. Did you hear me? $5, 3 years. Now, perhaps you can give more. How about $50 or $500, maybe even more? But please, don't be the one who fails to send at least $5. Click the Donate Now button at pointofview.net, pointofview.net, or send $5 to Point of View, Box 30, Dallas, Texas 75221. Box 30, Dallas 75221. Whatever amount you chip in, thank you for your gift. Point of View will continue after this.
You are listening to Point of View. The opinions expressed on Point of View do not necessarily reflect the views of the management or staff of this station. And now, here again is Kerby Anderson.
If you'd like to join our conversation today, 1-800-351-1212, an open line. Talked a little bit about the presidential campaign and also the surrender, possibly, of the internet to globalist hands, and we'll be talking more about that throughout the week, but that's an action item. I did want to turn to a couple of other issues, one that surfaced recently, and this has to do with the issue of gun control. You know, you've heard a lot of people during the campaign say, well, if certain people are elected, they're going to take away your Second Amendment rights, but, you know, that's difficult. If for no other reason than a lot of Americans are just not that interested in what amounts to essentially gun bans. So think through this for just a minute. If your challenge is to try to implement gun control policies, you've got to find another strategy to try to effectively do that. And the one that has now emerged is this idea that senior citizens are really dangerous people to own a gun. There's a professor at Johns Hopkins Bloomberg School of Public Health, and she's been writing about this, and there are other people that are starting to pick up on this, and has actually argued that right now in California you have what is known as the Gun Violence Restraining Order. And she argues that these kinds of mechanism, California's gun violence restraining orders, could provide a way that you could confiscate guns from older relatives. And so the argument is made that really this is something we need to do. If you look at the numbers for gun ownership, and we've done this before when John Lott's been in the studio with us and by phone, the people that are most likely to own a gun are age 50 and over. Not that young people don't, but I'm just saying that if you look at the percentages, they go up rather dramatically. You might remember that it was actually a senior citizen in Chicago that brought that one lawsuit, one of the two lawsuits that went to the Supreme Court on the Second Amendment. And that is because in some respects, they, if they were in their homes, feel that this is the great equalizer. They may not have the strength of a 20-year-old mugger or burglar, but they certainly can even up the odds if they have a firearm. And so this is why there has been some attention being paid to seniors. And so the argument is right now, according to the professor and a variety of gun control advocates now, is that senior citizens should not have a gun for at least one of three reasons. The first is that they might use it on themselves, suicide. And that is sometimes the case because if you look at suicides among elderly, sometimes that is a higher percentage. The other argument is that if they are not logically focused or if they're not always coherent, they might use a gun for someone who's in the home for a legitimate purpose, a serviceman or a caretaker or something like that. And then the third argument that is being made is that we should not allow senior citizens to have guns because, after all, they might be forgetful and they would leave it out for a grandchild to find. And so this is kind of the argument that's being used right now, that using the California and other states' gun violence restraining orders, you could begin to take guns out of the homes of senior citizens. Well, it's interesting because if you begin to look at the debate, that same kind of argument now is being used in other places. For example, college students. This has surfaced quite a bit as they've talked about whether you'd have open carry on campus and things like that. But some have said, we really cannot allow college students to have guns because, after all, some kind of spirited debate on campus might lead to some kind of murderous rampage. And then college students, of course, are notorious for all sorts of wild behavior, binge drinking. So that should be another reason why we should limit the amount or even the opportunity for a college student to have access to a gun. Well, look at a different category. They're starting to talk about, well, if you're an adult with children, that's another issue as well, because certainly they should not have a gun in the home because the child might find a gun and use it. And so that's sort of an argument used for that category of individuals. And then we've seen some now recently even suggesting that a single woman should not have a gun because, after all, they may be too weak to hold a gun, may be too inexperienced to effectively use a gun. And if you begin to see the trend here, it's a great way to begin to think about how to take first Granny's gun and then everybody else's gun. It's kind of a fascinating way in which this whole gun control debate and Second Amendment debate has kind of morphed. But I wanted to bring that to your attention, and we'll also take some phone calls. Let's head to Louisiana first, KPAE. And Ricky, what's on your mind?
Yes, Kerby, thank you. I just want to state that it's usually the older people and women that are the weakest and the most vulnerable to crime, and that's the ones that need guns the most. So after they go after older people, then the next thing, well, we need to take women away because they really, they should be playing with dolls, not guns. But AARP, the largest, old people retirement organization, I get time and I throw them in a garbage can, or I put on there, return to voted for Obama. I don't have nothing to do with AARP because they voted for Obama twice, and they're for gun control too. So I would have nothing to do with AARP. But like I've stated, the older people, women, is the ones that need the guns the most because some young thug come out of prison pumping iron. That's what they go after. They don't go after somebody just that walks out the health studio with 26-inch biceps. They go after women and older people is where most of their targets are. So that's the comment I wanted to make on that. Thank you, Kerby. Appreciate it. I'll let stop there.
And again, I just think it illustrates, again, how we're going to see more and more of this debate morph. We're hearing kind of focus-tested kind of ideas that were for common-sense gun control procedures. We want to make sure that guns are in the right hands. And then, of course, anything that has to do that might be considered a rifle, we say, now we're hearing it said that we don't want the weapons of war in our streets, which is just a nice way of saying we don't want to make available to AR-15s to anybody or any other kind of so-called. This debate has changed dramatically in America, and I wanted to alert you to that, and we'll have a commentary coming out about this because some of these writings now, for example, in the Johns Hopkins School, but also in some of the questions that you might receive. If you've gone to the doctor in the last year, it is quite possible, not all doctors, but some doctors might ask you, do you have a firearm in the home? Because this is one of the so-called public health questions. And, of course, some people say, none of your business. Some of them say yes. Some of them say no, or whatever, how they answer that. You can begin to see that the whole issue of Second Amendment and gun violence and gun control is becoming sort of morphing into as well a public health issue. So one more issue to put on the table. If you'd like to join us, 1-800-351-1212. I want to get back to something we talked about yesterday with Mark Davis when he was on the program, because we now see that there are a lot of people in Europe and the European Union that are having a very robust debate about borders. And of course, we're having a debate right now in the presidential campaign. But just recently, the president of the European Union, in the midst of all the chaos taking place, said that borders are the worst invention ever made by politicians. Now, you got to recognize he's saying this at a time in which you have had almost 1 million refugees from Syria and other countries who have flooded into Europe. You've had all the dysfunction that has taken place because of that. You've had all of the problems that have taken place. And yet here he is, as the head of the European Union, making a statement that borders are the worst invention ever made by politicians. And he's not alone. George Soros, who we've quoted from oftentimes on this program, referred to national borders as the obstacle. And if you think about how this is sort of playing out, it parallels some of the conversation we're having here in this country, because we don't necessarily have politicians in America making these kinds of bold statements. But sometimes they do tend to use sort of these rhetorical games by assuring us that we have secure borders. And President Obama, even in his farewell address at the Democratic convention, made the statement that the U.S. borders are more secure than they've ever been. Just look at this. In the last year, we've had 30,000 immigrants who have come from countries of terrorist concern. We've seen children from Mexico and Latin American countries just literally walk across our border. And so I think you have to recognize that even though in Europe it may be somewhat fashionable for a leader of the European Union to say that borders are a terrible invention, or for people like George Soros to say that borders are an obstacle to a globalist vision, and yet in this country say, well, we don't have people making those statements. But if you look at some of the statements they've made and look at some of the policies, that's essentially what we have. Individuals coming to this country without any kind of vetting. And of course, this has become front and center, one of the big debates in the presidential campaign, and I suspect will be a very important discussion and debate in some of the senatorial and congressional campaigns as well. So your thoughts about this? We've put a number of things on the table, everything from a presidential election, of course, the whole issue of the internet being given over to those who have globalist intentions, the issue of borders, and of course, as we talked about just a minute ago with Ricky, the attempt to take away Granny's gun. If you'd like to join us, 1-800-351-1212. We'll take your calls right after this.
Now, back to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
If you'd like to join the conversation, 1-800-351-1212. Let's go back to the phones in Georgia. Robert, thank you for joining us today here on Point of View.
Thanks for having me.
What would you like to add to our conversation today?
I have an 88-year-old father who lives in a typical suburban house with a half-acre lot. He's got well over 100 guns.
Wow. Quite an arsenal.
And he's several times shot out the windows. He leaves his gun closely loaded when the grandkids are in there, so we got to be very careful.
Yeah, and that's why we have restraining orders. Sometimes people are dangerous to themselves or to other people, and that's why a restraining order makes sense. But, of course, what I'm talking about is how they want to use that to take away a lot more than just a few. But go ahead, tell us about that.
That's exactly my point. My uncle, on the other hand, is 2 years younger. He has several weapons, and he's total confident. And I think the situation in elderly, that's a one-on-one situation that should be controlled by the family and the doctor and monitored by family like you would any other situation.
Makes sense. Yeah.
For the American Civil Liberties Union and the NRA. And so I thoroughly believe in all the bills of rights, to include the Second Amendment. And it's just a one-on-one situation. It's like any other medical situation. And that's my comment. I love your show. Thank you so much.
Well, and I think you made a very good comment. Appreciate you reminding us about that. And again, my point was not to say that these restraining orders are not necessary, but when you start talking about this as a way to maybe advance our goals of gun control, you can see what the difference is. But I'd love to get all of your comments, and that's why the program is called Point of View. So let's go to South Carolina. Peter, what would you like to add to our conversation today?
Well, the conversation that I have with most people on the Second Amendment and the whole militia notion is kind of the same as the illegal immigration, where the arguments are mainly based on ignorance. The Second Amendment, you can go to the Federalist Paper 29 and get the Founding Fathers' original thoughts on what is meant by a militia. It's not quite as interpretive as people like to think it is. This is only interpretive of what a militia is. It's kind of a 70s thing. You know, prior to that, it wasn't. Militias are really well defined. Mm-hmm. And it's not just anyone who wants to get together a group of their friends and the guns and be the Bundys and say you're a militia, and that's what the Second Amendment is about. The Second Amendment is really about preventing people like the Bundys, not empowering them.
Right. Good point. And again, George Mason and others were writing about this, so it's not like this is not well known. And we've even in the past done a whole program on kind of the constitutional understanding of what that was and all the rest. But you also want to talk. Go ahead.
Presented by the NRA are completely in contrast to what the reality of it actually is.
What about the immigration issue? Because you mentioned that real quickly, and before I get some other calls, I think I wanted to hear your connection there.
Well, this whole notion of illegal immigrants, and people like to say that their ancestors did it right when they came here. We've only had illegal immigration for about 80 years. It was a creation of the Great Depression. Prior to that, you just showed up, and that's how you got here. There was no going through the right thing and becoming a citizen. I mean, my great-grandfather came here from Italy in 1917. He didn't go, he just got here. That was how he got here. He never became an American citizen. I know because he never really learned to speak English, which you have to do to become an American citizen.
Right. And so they began to want to have assimilation because they recognized that problem. Now, of course, many of them went through Ellis Island, so we wanted to screen them for defects and health issues and all the rest. But it began to be a reality that America is an idea. So we really wanted people to understand that. And the sad reality, Peter, is, and I haven't talked about this recently, but I just saw a piece on this the other day. Most people that are naturalized citizens oftentimes know more about our history and our Constitution than the people that were born here. So that's why you're having more and more of these high schools suggesting that in order to graduate from high school, you need to pass the citizenship test that we require people that come here and become naturalized citizens to go through.
And whoever became a civics in high school, I mean, my God, at least have a base understanding of how the government works. And that way, when people tell you politicians, act like kings, you understand that it's not really true because that's not how the system actually works.
Mm-hmm. That's good. Peter, appreciate your phone call. I want to just give a few more real quick chance to join our conversation before we go to our guest in the second hour. And so we'll head out to Texas, KVNE. Gail, thank you for calling today.
How are you doing?
Very good. What would you like to add?
Well, I think it's a shame when you do across-the-board discrimination, for lack of a better word, that all grannies, all students, all people that drink or whatever should not do this, not have this right. Well, that's an across-the-board, that's a knee-jerk thing. Who's to say a 69-year-old granny, she's not going to go postal and
probably
you know what I mean?
Yeah.
And shoot up a school, or an average student that carries is not going to go to Columbine or Dallas and shoot up the police. It's the radicals that are taking away our liberties. Now, if Granny can't see to shoot, Granny probably can't drive.
Right. There's all sorts of issues. But again, as
Yeah.
you've heard me say on this program so many times, people want to get out this big, wide, 6-foot wide brush and paint everybody with a broad brush.
Yep.
And, it's case by case, just as we were talking about. Let me just real quickly, I'm kind of moving because I want to give just a few more of you a chance to join our conversation since I won't be able to take these calls in the second hour. And that is to head real quickly to Louisiana. Steve, I think you had some comments.
I just tuned in. I was listening to your show, and I heard something about the illegal immigrants. And
That's
it's
right.
like George Soros. He wants them. He's into this globalization, which, in some ways it would work, some ways it wouldn't. But if they want them here, why don't they foot the bill?
Yeah,
So
why don't you pay for it? Yeah.
Yeah, let them pay for them. Quit taking our tax dollars. 'Cause I've lived here all my life. I'm sure if you go back in my history, my people are from somewhere else because there's really nobody except the Indians that were here. But if these politicians want them here, let them foot the bill.
Well, and again, my commentary yesterday was about the refugees, because we've had some of the comments being said that, well, we need as Americans to take in these refugees. And my line on that was, you first. Because when's the last time anybody in Europe took any of the refugees that we have been able to take in and took in because they came from Central America? And so I recognize how we should have compassion. And in the commentary I talked about, of course, whether it's Deuteronomy 10 or whether it's Matthew 7 or some of the other biblical principles I applied there, that we certainly are to treat aliens and foreigners well. So certainly compassion is one part of it, but common sense is the other. And when we are not sure what is in the hearts and minds of some of these individuals coming here, because they have come from what we've just talked about, these countries of terrorist concern. That's a phrase that is used so often. 30,000 immigrants that have come from countries of terrorist concern. That's a federal designation. Then maybe some of them are here because they want to experience the American dream, but some of them obviously come here for other reasons, especially since we've heard from people that I've interviewed on this program who said that ISIS has been using these refugee groups to infiltrate as well. So this is why we need to think through those issues. And Steve, thank you for also reminding us that there is a cost involved. And those that are calling for the open borders, why don't you bring them into your country and you pay for them? And we'll get back to you in 20 years and tell us how it turned out. I've got a feeling it's not going to work out so well for you. Let's take a break. When we come back, Benton Hall's going to be in studio with us today. He's been with Campus Crusade for Christ, now called Crew, in the high school division. New book out, Tales from the Bike Path. I think you're going to really enjoy the conversation with him. And I think we'll also learn a little bit more about ministry to high school students. So as we have kind of a back-to-school program, you'll learn some lessons that you can apply to your children and grandchildren, or maybe even some of the children in school, some of the young people in school and in church. So let's take a break. We'll hear from Benton Hall in studio right after this.
If you've been a Christian for any length of time, no doubt you've heard about Jesus feeding thousands with a few loaves of bread and a couple of fish. Jesus took something small and turned it into something big. Recently, someone here at Point of View made an interesting discovery. He did some math and figured out that according to the number of faithful listeners we have, if you and every other listener gave $5, it would help Kerby and the team bring you interviews and commentary for not 3 months, but 3 years. You heard me right. If every listener donates just $5, we'd pay what it costs to bring you this needed information for 3 years. And if you urge a friend to join you, you send 5, they send 5, well, you can imagine the impact. Click the Donate Now button at pointofview.net, pointofview.net, or send $5 to Point of View, Box 30, Dallas, Texas 75221. Box 30, Dallas 75221. Send $5. Urge a friend to join you. Support Point of View. Point of View will continue after this.
I just thank God for y'all. I listen to you every day, truly. I wanted to thank y'all for everything you do each day to inform Christian families and our community about the things we can do, and just the way you're so informative. I listen to you daily and love you guys and appreciate you so much.
God bless you, Kerby, for keeping this show so on track and for the decades of wonderful help to this nation that Point of View has been. We're all big fans of your work, and we pray that God will just prosper it.
As a Christian, over the years that I've followed this program, I am constantly challenged to be on guard and to evaluate what's going on. And if for no other reason, to protect the caliber and the truth of your programming, I need to participate and to back your program financially to ensure that the truth stays out there for people to hear, to view, and to be a part of.
This is Point of View Radio.
Hi, this is Kerby Anderson. You know, each day we take on the tough issues and provide a biblical perspective to them. The topics we cover are wide-ranging. Apologetics, theology, prophecy, creation and evolution, intelligent design, marriage, family, child-rearing, the millennial generation, trends in society, politics, economics, business, religious liberty, the Constitution, public policy, foreign policy, military policy, tensions in the Middle East, abortion, homosexuality, pornography, sexual ethics, media, technology, history, and America's godly heritage. We talk about anything that affects your faith, your family, or your freedom. So don't go anywhere, because Point of View continues right now.
Across America, live. This is Point of View. And now, Kerby Anderson.
Thank you for joining me today. We're going to spend some time in a kind of almost a back-to-school kind of mode to let you think a little bit more about those teenagers around you, and that is, you may be a parent of a teenager, you may be a grandparent of a teenager, you may be a teacher. And I recognize that some young individuals sometimes are not even in school. Most of the kids where I am living right now have already gone back to school, but I was just up in New York, and school doesn't start till after Labor Day. And I think it's really one of those immutable laws of the universe that school shouldn't start until after Labor Day. So a couple of you might be teenagers listening in today, and so I think you're going to enjoy the conversation as well, because we're going to be talking with Benton Hall. He has spent 43 years with Cru, which is, of course, the formerly known as Campus Crusade, and he's been in the high school ministry of Cru for 43 different years. An individual that certainly has developed a great sense of humor, as you'll see from his book, Tales from the Bike Path. Individual that is one of the oldest youth ministries you can imagine. If you've been in ministry for 43 years with high school students, the fact that you're clothed in your right mind and sane, Benton, is really a testimony to God's grace in your life, isn't it?
It is.
Well, these teenagers, they're fun. But talk about that for just a minute before we get into your book. And by the way, we have information about Benton Hall on the website. And so go to pointofview.net. You can click on his picture there. That will take you to talesfromthebikepath.com. You'll learn more about him. You'll learn more about the book. You can order it there. And of course, we also have a way you can order it both in paperback and Kindle. Great book. But before we get into that, let's talk about high school ministry. You started that 43 years ago. Carl Wilson, an endorsement here from Dr. Dennis Rainey, who's been on the program with us many times, Family Life. You've been doing this for some time and working with high school students right there in the public schools.
Yes, and it's been an interesting ride. When I first came on staff, Dennis Rainey was my city director in Boulder, Colorado. Mm-hmm. What a privilege. And then shortly after that, he left Cru to start, he stayed on Cru staff, but left the high school division to start the Family Life Ministry. Yeah. It was my privilege to work with Dennis for about 9 months. They don't leave a hot potato like that in place very long. They kept promoting him up, but I was blessed to work with Dennis and learned a lot from him, and that was a good way to get my feet wet in Boulder, Colorado.
Well, and Boulder, Colorado is a little different than a lot of the places where you are now. I was born in Berkeley, and I've spoken at the University of Colorado in Boulder, and it looks a lot like and feels a lot like Berkeley, so I can imagine. But before we get into the book, let's talk about that for just a minute, because you have enjoyed a very successful ministry in the public schools, and Benton, from time to time, will bring in individuals that will come here and educate us about the religious liberty that we have. We have a great deal of freedom. If a local church would like to have some kind of outreach in the public schools, or if somebody wanted to join Cru staff and be in the high school ministry, there's a lot of opportunities. And I would think most people would think that those doors are really closed, but they're not, are they?
Well, in North Texas and a lot of places around the United States, so many of the school administrators are believers and would love to have a way to have their kids have access to Christian ministries and in a legal way. And there's national laws that govern some of that, and then a lot of it's just local principals run their schools, and some of them are willing to stick their necks out, and others. There's ways to do it where nobody does anything illegally. I'll just say that. You can volunteer as coaches. You can volunteer as trainers. You can visit your kid's high school and volunteer in the school, substitute teach. There's a million ways to to encourage high school kids.
I might just mention, too, that there are things like the Equal Access Act that says, really, if you have a ski club or you have a debate club or a chess club, you can have a Bible club, and that's not illegal. And so sometimes people don't actually exercise their freedom because they don't know that they have that freedom. And, of course, oftentimes a person that sits in the chair next to you is Kelly Shackelford. He comes in every Friday, and he's with Liberty Institute. And he has many times sent demand letters, or one of his staff has, to say, you know, we really do need you to recognize that there are laws that protect the rights of Christian students on campus. There are also laws that protect the rights of Christian teachers on campus as well.
Sure.
And so that has been very helpful. And every once in a while, somebody will say, well, if we do this, the ACLU will sue us. And Kelly always says yes. And almost every one of those cases where in matter of fact, I think every one of the ACLU cases, they won every one of those. So, you know, you're going up against somebody that has a perfect 100% victory on that particular campus and that particular issue. So this is something to just pay attention to. And so when we talk about ministry, what would you say to people that really wanted to have a ministry? Because right now we have, I suspect, some pastors that are youth pastors or senior pastors, or maybe parents that say, it'd really be good if we did something to have an outreach from our church to the local community, and in particular the public schools. What would you suggest? Are there materials available?
There are. Crew High School, we've got materials on how to start a ministry on a high school. The starter handbook, and other ministries have got that too. And we coach people all over the country. Every year we coach nearly 100 people from a coaching center, virtual coaching, on how to get started on your school, what to do and how to go about it. And all that is available. I'm sure other ministries have got the same stuff available. But if the Lord's putting it on your heart to start something, then I would assume that He wants to use you. And prayer is a great place to start. And then get some friends that want to help and begin to ask questions and seek advice. And like I hate to be nebulous, but there are 1,000 ways to skin that cat in order to help high school kids. And of course, they're on campus, 7 or 8 hours a day. And so that's a place we would like to have an impact. And yet the Equal Access Act makes it very clear that if you have a club on campus, it has to be student-led and organized. And they can bring you in as a speaker. But like, I can't be at those meetings every week. What I've done locally is we've organized youth pastors to come in, and they love that, and that gives them a chance to address kids in those meetings and stuff. So, but there's a lot of ways to get on campus, and the key thing is high school kids are very open to spiritual things. They always have been, no matter what decade it is. There has never been a change in the hunger of students to know God.
Yeah. And again, the limitation, the only one I'll mention is before we take a break, and then we'll come back and get into the book, is that it needs to be student-led, student-initiated. Yeah. And so whether it's a huddle from a Fellowship of Christian Athletes, or whether it's a Crew high school ministry, or whatever it might be, there are just all sorts of opportunities. But again, as we're getting into the school year, let me just challenge those of you listening today. Think about the fact that a very significant majority, almost 80%, of young people that are high school age are going to go through the public schools. Now, it's great that we have the Christian schools, the home schools, and charter schools, and all the rest, but this is just another really great outreach that I would certainly recommend to you. So please take the time to find out a little bit more about that. And if you'd like to know more about Benton Hall, we have a link to his website, especially the book Tales from the Bike Path, Enjoying the Steady Reveal of God's Heart During 40 Years with Crew. So we're going to talk about some fun things, tennis ball, guerrilla warfare, as well as golf, and all sorts of fun things that happen in high school ministry. And if you would like to join us, I know this may be one where you just want to sit back and listen to a great storyteller tell you some stories from his over 40 years of ministry. But if you'd like to join us at any point, perhaps you can share some of the things happening in your high school ministry as well. 1-800-351-1212. Benton Hall with us in studio. We'll continue our conversation right after this.
This is Viewpoints with Kerby Anderson.
Doubt is something that we all face, and all of us have doubts, but these shouldn't lead to confusion, hopelessness, and unbelief. Doubts can often deepen our dependence on God and give us empathy for others. Pastor Bobby Conway was on my radio program recently to talk about his new book, Doubting Towards Faith, The Journey to Confident Christianity. Sean McDowell wrote the foreword to the book, and he was also on my radio program recently and talked about doubt. Bobby Conway reminds us that there are different forms of doubt: emotional doubt, intellectual doubt, volitional doubt, and evidential doubt. He also has 2 chapters on the doubt triggers in our world today. These range from questions about alleged contradictions in the Bible to moral and ethical questions found in the Bible. And he reminds us that Jesus can handle our doubts. After all, Thomas had questions and doubts. Jesus did not condemn him, but answered his questions and provided evidence for his doubts. In the foreword and his radio interview with me, Sean McDowell shared how doubts first hit him as a college student. He sat down with his father to share his doubts. Josh McDowell responded, I think it's great that you want to find truth. This actually gave Sean room to pursue his questions and resolve his doubts. It allowed him to make the faith of his parents his own faith. He discovered that doubts don't have to be the end of faith. They can often be the impetus for the development of a deeper, more genuine faith. And of course, you have to be intentional in your search for truth. So I would say that if you have doubts or know someone who has doubts, this is an excellent book to read and pass on to others. It is well written and immensely practical. And as some of us have said, we wish we had this book when we were growing up and asking good questions that few, if any, seem to be able to answer. I'm Kerby Anderson, and that's my point of view.
Take Kerby and the Point of View team with you on the go with the Point of View app. Search for Point of View Radio at the Apple or Google Play stores.
You're listening to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
Privileged to have in studio with us today, Benton Hall. He has served 43 years with Crew's High School Division and is the author of this book, Tales from the Bike Path, enjoying the steady revival of God's heart during 40 years with Crew. One of the things early on in your book that you talk about is just the kind of fun that you need to have with young people. And if you're going to be in high school ministry, right, it's got to be fun. So you tell this one story, and you can tell some others, but this one's I wanted to grab real quickly. Tennis ball guerrilla warfare, a night of justice and mercy, because what happens is they're playing kind of tennis ball guerrilla warfare. It's kind of like a capture the flag. They're throwing tennis balls all around, but guess what? They call the police. First of all, one comes out with a shotgun, one comes out with the police. But tell the story, because it's, I think, important to recognize whether it was Crew or Young Life or a lot of other ministries, they recognize you got to have fun if you're going to attract the kids, right?
Well, our ministry is voluntary, and kids aren't brought there by their parents unless they ask for a ride. So it has to be fun, and there usually has to be food of some kind, especially for boys. And I lived the book title, Tales from the Bike Path, comes from the fact Susie and I have lived on one of the bike paths in Plano for 20-something years. And so our backyard rolls right out onto it with a picket fence, and so we can. And it's a utility easement that the city ran a bike path down. So. Yeah. We had Bible study at the house one night, and we had 30-something guys, and we've invented this game called tennis ball guerrilla warfare, which is capture the flag, but instead of tagging each other, you throw tennis balls. Of course, boys were crazy about that. And we like to play at night. And so we were playing at night behind my house, about 30 guys, up and down the bike path in the dark. And I had... we'd done this before a couple of times, and nothing had ever happened. This time, a couple of my neighbors stepped out, and one of them came out in his boxer shorts with a shotgun and wanted to know what in the blank these kids were doing out here. And he was talking to a kid that had moved to Texas from New Orleans after Katrina, and that kid came running over to me, and his eyes were gigantic, and he was like, Mr. Hall, that man said this, and I grew up in New Orleans. I've never seen anybody with a shotgun before. It's like, so about that time, also one of my great neighbors, and we have a great neighborhood, they had called the police. So a cop car comes rolling up the bike path in the dark, spotlighted 4 of my guys, and of course, the guys were having fun, so they all turned to one of the boys named Henry and yelled, "Run, Henry, run!" And of course, while he's spotlighted, he runs away. But one of those 4 was Michael Wang, one of our student leaders. So he walked over to the police car and told the officer that this was a game and we were having a boys' Bible study. And the guy just looked at him, hit the up button on the window, and slowly drove away. It was God's mercy that night. And I sent out a mass email to my neighborhood on Next Door Neighbor and apologized and sent the guy a private message that stepped down in his underwear, apologizing to him. But those kind of fun things, those kids will never forget that night.
That's right.
And that's the kind of thing that gives the ministry PR. It sounds crass. Jesus would need PR, but that's the way it is. If kids are having fun, they tell the stories, then more kids come and they hear about how to walk with the Lord. So it serves a purpose. I didn't call the cops, but somebody else did.
But again, you talk about, fun and food, and there is a sense in which that needs to be an element of anything that you do if you're going to attract young people to your church, to an outreach. And so often it is kind of a group dynamic. I mean, I've jokingly said I could come up to a teenager and say, "You have just won an all-expensed trip around the world." What's the first question he's going to ask? Who's going to be there? Who am I going with? What are we going to do? Instead of going, okay, great. I mean, because peer pressure, fun, food, all that's really key in ministry, isn't it? Talk about that, if you might.
It is. We tell the kids to bring their friends to our meetings. We had a big meeting last night, and several new guys showed up. And I had sat down at a football game Friday night next to some women I did not know and found out who they were and who their kids were. They were on a football team. And I said, I met your son last week. And I said, we do a Bible study. I said, Monday nights, you just open the door and just send them out. Just send them over to Chase Oaks Church where we meet. Well, they showed up. And these two, they're not brothers. They were cousins. They had the same last name. But they only showed up because other football players brought them. They knew they were safe because their friends were going to be there.
Right.
And very few kids have the gumption to come to something by themselves. And where they don't know anybody, and that's just the way it is.
Well, and it's true whether you're inviting them to a youth group or, as Greg Laurie has told us and sat in that chair many times. Most of the people that come to a Greg Laurie crusade or in the past a Billy Graham crusade were invited. I've had Jack Graham sit in that chair and say the same thing. The 2 out of every 3 people you invite to come to church will come with you to your church if you invite them. So that is a very important issue.
And the kids, they want to be together. We try to get them to go to conferences, and the first question is the one, who's going to be there?
Yeah.
Well, you will be, and you'll be bringing a friend.
And you'll have a lot of fun.
Yeah.
Well, again, fun is part of that. And again, I'm all about youth ministry. I can't think of the number of times I've had a pie thrown in my face, or I've had those surgical masks you put on the top and you're supposed to blow up and explode, But we also recognize that it's always been important to empower and disciple our kids. But it's really true, Benton, today in the 21st century. They're going out into a war. So when you get them together, it's almost like boot camp, spiritual boot camp, isn't it? So what do we need to talk about with our teenage kids today and in our ministries?
Well, we've become huge on telling stories. And that's what my book is, about 70-something short stories. But we do that with the kids. And if I want to talk about dating or sex or marriage, I find a Bible story and work off that story and then come up with 4 or 5 good questions at the end to ask them to get them involved on how does this spin out in your life. And we did David and Goliath last night, which is probably the second most favorite Bible story after Noah's Ark that everybody knows. But for the young guys that are playing athletics, a little guy killing the big guy, that's in their wheelhouse.
Yeah.
But we ask questions like, what was David's motivation?
Yeah. Good question.
And how did the Lord interact with this whole situation? And how big was Goliath? Because you want to emphasize 125 pounds of armor and 9 feet high, and he had not only had a javelin, he had a spear, and just on and on and on. So when God overcomes in that situation, we want him to say, hey, God is for you. If he's asking you to do something, he's going to do it with you. And we want to empower them by increasing their knowledge of who God is. And these stories reveal God's heart, and they reveal how he interacts with them. And then we make the direct correlation to football, school. Of course, family is the most important thing that they're involved in. And we want them to have the confidence, hey, God is going to help me with this stuff. Every guy either gets geometry or he gets algebra, but very few get both. Mm-hmm. And they all have to take those classes. And I mean, it is like a deer in the headlights. And I'm like, hey, it's only for a year. The Lord will be with you every day in class. He knows you can pass. I'm not saying he's going to give you an A, but if you'll trust him, you'll get through this. And a lot of life is going to be like this geometry class. It's going to be tough. Yeah. But he's training you how to stay in the faith and how to see him work. And we were just having that visit with some of the guys last night. They were working through some stuff. So, and the better you get to know the Lord, the easier it is to fall in love with him. And we're building leaders. We're student leaders. I've got a bunch of guys I work with, and I tell them, our main goal is for you to love Jesus. And if it ever sounds like the goal is to do this and do that, just wave your hand and say, Mr. Hall, I think we're off base. Because I don't want it to be legalistic. I want them to love Christ because they see who he is and how much he cares about them. I mean, John 15, after that great invitation to pray, if you abide in me and my words abide in you, ask whatever you wish, Jesus tells him, he says, as the Father has loved me, so have I loved you. Abide in my love. And I'm just like, okay, if he loves you the same as God loves him, gang, we have a lot to learn here. There's an incredible, of course, that love means he's going to let you suffer just like he did, but it means he's with you. When you go through the valley of shadow of death, he is with you. There's no desertion, and any rejection you come across, he's been rejected, he's been hurt, and misunderstood. So he knows how you feel, and life isn't about winning every game or getting A's on all the tests or being first chair violin. It's about getting to know the Lord and letting him use you in those situations.
Very good. Let's take a break. When we come back, we're going to get into a couple of other issues. Young people today are facing a lot more challenges before. The intact family that used to exist isn't there as much now. There are a lot of very important challenges they face. And, of course, a lot of your stories in here have to do with leadership. I want to talk about how we build leaders because you've got some good stories there as well. All part of the book, Tales from the Bike Path. And if you would like to know a little bit more about Benton Hall or about his book, we have a link on our website, pointofview.net. It will point you to talesfromthebikepath.com. You'll find all sorts of great stories there and also have a chance to contact with him as well. But if you'd like to join us, we'd love to hear from you as well. 1-800-351-1212. We'll be right back.
There is a big incentive to pay your electric bill. If you don't, you find yourself in the dark. But who pays to make sure you're educated on the key issues of the day, to bring you wisdom for life at work, at home, and in the culture, like you hear from guests here on Point of View? Who makes sure that our electric bill gets paid? You're way ahead of me, aren't you? That's right. You do. The truth is, if every listener this week gave just $5, we could pay our bills for about the next 3 years. Did you hear me? $5, 3 years. Now, perhaps you can give more. How about $50 or $500, maybe even more? But please, don't be the one who fails to send at least $5. Click the Donate Now button at pointofview.net, pointofview.net, or send $5 to Point of View, Box 30, Dallas, Texas 75221. Box 30, Dallas 75221. Whatever amount you chip in, thank you for your gift. Point of View will continue after this.
are listening to Point of View. The opinions expressed on Point of View do not necessarily reflect the views of the management or staff of this station. And now, here again is Kerby Anderson.
Final half hour. If you'd like to join us, 1-800-351-1212. Perhaps you're involved in youth ministry. You'd like to join the conversation. We'd love to hear from you. If not, just sit back and listen, take some notes, and if nothing else, I think you'll really enjoy Tales from the Bike Path. As we've already explained, having a home right there by the bike path and all the stories that come from an individual that has served with Crew's high school ministry for 43 different years. Benton Hall in studio with us, and you can watch online. But just before I get back to the book, let me mention that we do have a link to talesfromthebikepath.com. There is information about the book as well as a bio, media. If people wanted to contact you and maybe learn some things, of course, you also can follow you on Facebook and Twitter. We have those links there as well. Talk a little bit about what's available, because you have some great resources. And if anybody's involved in youth ministry, or if they just have a couple of these teenagers in their home and want to know, how do I disciple them and how do I help them grow in their faith, you have some great resources, don't you?
Well, our national website is crewhighschool.com.
Right.
And there's a ton of stuff on there. And if you qualify and you want to start a ministry, then we have coaches that will coach you over the phone and help you crank something up in your city. And you can call it anything you want. You don't even have to use the name Crew. We just want to back anybody that wants to start something in their area. And you can message me on Facebook if you want to, and is a great way to contact me. And there's a phone number also on the website too. So, and then benton.hall@crew.org. You can email me.
Yeah, it's all very easy to find. And I might just mention that link is there. And then, of course, we have your links both at Facebook and at Twitter. We have your picture, we have your bio, we have your book, everything you need right there. And I think, just let me say that for just a minute, there are people that say, it really would be great to have a ministry. And, if you can figure it all out on your own, great. But, 40 years of road wear gives you a chance to really have a chance to say, here's the things you might want to do, and here's some things you might want to avoid. And so it really is almost a ministry out of a box. So this is something that I really encourage people to find out more about. Let's also, before we get into the leadership issue, because I want to make that a very significant focus, just remind ourselves for a minute that teen ministry is so different. 40 years ago, you could pretty much assume when you were working with teenagers, a lot of these kids were coming from intact families. They weren't dealing with all the political correctness. Now you even have on the university campuses so-called safe places, and you have political correctness, and you have multiculturalism. This is a very difficult path that a teenager has to walk through today in the 21st century, right?
It is. And the sad statistic is more and more students are growing up in single-parent homes or with extended family that are not their original parents. And so you have to take that into consideration. And I'm working with high school boys. I'm not trying to play a father role in their life, but it's a mentor role. And I'll have a kid say, I'm having a hard time with my stepdad, and we'll talk through it. And I'll say, well, what's going on? And stepdads have the worst job ever, because it's not their kid, and yet sometimes their wife wants them to treat them like it's their kid. And they can't please everybody usually, unless they've been the dad since the child was little tiny. But if you pick them up from adolescence on up, you've got a God's work on your hands. I'll tell you right now. And then these kids are growing up. Teenagers. They're becoming adults. They want to assert their independence. They're naturally angry. That's just part of the chemistry. And you're the easiest target. And there's a lot of displaced anger. And my hat's off to parents these days. I've raised my three. We launched them. They're out on their own, and they're doing a great job. But even while I was working with high school kids, raising it's a lot of work. And then when these kids are coming from half homes, it's even tougher.
It sure is. Let's get into leadership just a little bit, because this is one of the things that, again, Crew has been very good at, raising up leaders and having action groups and master action groups and all the kinds of things there. You've got whole sections here about leadership at altitude, leadership and humility. Tell us a few of these stories, if nothing else, on battles, leadership, and God's glory. You've got to just, many of your stories are about leadership. So pick a few that we need to hear from, because I really want people to know how to build the next generation of leaders in our country.
I've learned about leadership the hard way, and when the Lord gives you a leadership position, it's not to lord over anybody. First Peter makes that real clear. You're to serve like a shepherd, and one of the best ways in youth ministry to lead is to humiliate yourself, and kids love it. They're trying so desperately to be cool that when you humiliate yourself, they just can relax. Okay, Mr. Hall has given up trying to be cool, and so therefore I don't have to worry about it either, and we can all just be ourselves around here. But we had a conference in Tampa, Florida years ago, and we did the same staff. We worked a conference for a week. Those kids left. A whole nother group of several hundred kids came for 2 weeks for another conference. And then the fourth week, we had a group from Chicago come, 357 kids. We were worn out, and they were not excited about our bedtime rules and some other stuff. So one night, some of the guys, we're staying at University of South Florida in the dorms, so kids were running back and forth from room to room late at night when they're not supposed to be. Of course, they think that's the prerogative. That's what makes camp fun. We're trying to go to sleep. And I was at my wit's end, and one of the bigger staff came out, Enoch Williams. He's still in Christian ministry, and he told these kids, son, if you don't get in your room, we will put you on a bus and send you home. And the kid just straightened up and humbly walked back to his room, and I went, is that really an option? And he goes, yes, it is. And I call it the nuclear option. I've never had to use it. But those kids were so rowdy that week, and what happened was a unique thing happened. The University of South Florida came to us and said, hey, we've got hundreds of pounds of leftover watermelon. Would you like it? We were like, we would. So we put together a skit to get the students from our dorms over to where we were going to give them the watermelon. And in the skit, we conducted this crazy skit, which involved all the staff guys running around the kids on stick horses and with kerchiefs on and little tiny straw cowboy hats, making fools of ourselves, acting like we were ranch hands, and we were gonna conduct them through Indian territory over to where the watermelon, to a place where the Indians we were gonna make peace with them. Nothing was said about watermelon. And that we got the kids up, 2 lines, and we marched them across the University of South Florida campus into these woods, and there was a big sign that said the Colonel Duncan Gibbs Rootin' Tootin' Highfalutin' Watermelon Bash. And there were a couple staff dressed like Indians, and they greeted us. And then kids just dove into all this cut up watermelon. We had seed spitting contests. But the anger toward the staff and all the rules completely dissipated after that watermelon deal, because we had humiliated ourselves and made fun of ourselves.
Good point. Yeah.
And I'm watching that, and there's a biblical concept. Jesus was humiliated in several ways, and most people don't think, it's crude to think about it, but when he was flogged, the Romans would flog you buck naked. And when they crucified you, it was buck naked. The Catholics have given us a little breechcloth across the crosses that we hang up, and so have the artists, but it wasn't. It was total humiliation. And if our Savior and leader is going to go through humiliation in order to accomplish a great goal, our salvation, we can see that humiliation is part of leadership, and especially with high school kids. It just works. I hate to say it, I'm sorry it works, but if you're not ready to make fun of yourself, you're not going to have much of a ministry. That's just the way it goes down.
Well, it's a great line, and it's just one more reminder of what it takes to really be effective in terms of leadership. When we're going to take a break, I'd like to come back and talk about how we can build some of those leadership qualities in young people today, because as I said before, when you started 43 years ago, you could assume that probably a lot of them had a fair amount of self-confidence. They grew up in intact homes. They maybe in many cases were those who were the baby boom generation or the children of baby boomers, and this was a time of unprecedented affluence and optimism and encouragement. Today, a lot of young people don't believe that they really can accomplish anything significant and maybe are really down on themselves. So how do we build into them some of those leadership qualities so that they will be effective in ministry in the 21st century? You can find some great illustrations from this book, Tales from the Bike Path, Enjoying the Steady Reveal of God's Heart During 40 Years with Crew. He's actually been with them 43 years. And again, as I've mentioned, you can go to our website, pointofview.net. And those of you that have teenagers, those of you that are involved in any kind of youth ministry, any of you teachers, I would certainly encourage you to get a copy of the book. And we have a link to talesfromthebikepath.com. There's a section there that tells about the book, some information about media, some blogs, and other resources. So take advantage of that. And we'll come back and finish off our conversation with Benton Hall. All that happening right after these important messages.
Now, back to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
For a few more minutes, we have in studio with us today Benton Hall talking about his book, Tales from the Bike Path. And Benton, before we go, I want to talk about how to provide leadership qualities, discipleship. I mean, because after all, Paul told Timothy that you should find faithful men and teach them so they would be able to teach others also. And I know you're into the idea of transforming leadership and really helping develop the next leadership of the 21st century. So how do we do that with our high school kids?
Well, I think youth ministry nationally has dealt with this over the years, and I think we've all realized that you can't just talk to them. That's what they're getting at school all day.
Yes.
And they're not up for that.
They've listened out. They're not talked out, but they've listened out. Yeah.
And so any of your stuff with them needs to be interactive. Gospel Light developed a thing called learner-centered training back in the 70s, and Crusade's been all over it. But it's the idea of getting them working, interacting. Like we had a Bible study last night. We told a story. Then we broke into 3 small groups.
Mm-hmm.
And I had student leaders monitor and keep the conversation going in each one of those groups. We had a group of sophomores, a group of juniors, and a group of seniors. And so we're into leadership development because we want to give the ministry away to the kids.
Right.
If they own it. And like last night, some of the kids showed up and they were so excited that they had brought some friends. And I was excited too because that's one of our goals. Some of the guys... I've got a leader that he says, just please don't put me up front. And I said, that's fine. We don't require that you run one of the meetings, but I've got leaders who run the meeting. They open it, they make announcements, they do the games, they craft the skits and the promotions, and then we'll have them share their stories.
Mm-hmm.
Somebody's proposed you could have a ministry based on life stories, testimonies. We want the kids we train them to share their story in 5 to 10 minutes, and you can expand it or contract it based on how interested the person is you're talking with. But that gives them the confidence that if they don't have a booklet with them or they're in a unique situation where they have just a few minutes, they could get into their story. And then they feel equipped, and then they feel like they're part of the Great Commission. They're helping spread the good news. I had a kid text me last night after we got home. I haven't had a chance to answer yet, but I'm talking to this girl and she, this, and what do I say? And how do I get her over to Jesus? We also train kids at our conferences how to share their faith, how to lead Bible studies, how to do a group presentation to their Tiddlywink Club or the cheerleaders or the band or the choir. We had a band meeting at one of the schools a couple of years ago, and we had the drum majors get up and run the whole meeting. That's what the school requires. We're meeting in the school, but they ran the whole thing, games, and they had somebody come in that was an older student that talked about crew and how they could get involved in meetings and stuff like that, but it was all student run. Kerby, they run the malls. We might as well give them responsibility. I mean,
that's right.
The band teacher is getting blood out of these kids, and the football coach is too, and they're in so many extracurricular activities where they're asked to step up and lead, and they can do it.
Yeah. And I think sometimes we under-challenge them sometimes in youth ministry. I mean, I've seen kids before, they're just kind of bored with youth ministry, and they say, well, I just go because my parents want, and I'm tired of this. I can't wait to go do something else. And I was, well, what do you want to do? Well, after I graduate, I'm going to go into the Marine Corps. You go, really? Or I want to be a Navy SEAL. And I'm going, I think we've under-challenged these kids if this is what their plan is when they graduate from high school.
Exactly.
Or they're going to go in the military academy. These are people with a tremendous amount of discipline. But one other thought about in terms of leadership and maybe even getting a vision, it does seem to me that getting young people into a short-term mission or a beach project, you've used that over the years.
Yes.
Isn't that a great way to really get them out of their environment, put them in a new environment, maybe stretch them beyond their comfort zone? Isn't that a very effective way to kind of develop them?
And I think all the churches realize now short-term missions are incredible, the impact they have in country and with the people that go on. And we've been taking kids to Spain from our ministry the last several years.
Yes. And
prior to that, Budapest, Hungary, and we take kids all over the world at spring break and in the summer on 1 week to 6 week trips, depending on where you're going. The kids we train them how to raise their funds for those things, which develops leadership.
That's another thing.
And faith. Those things coexist, obviously. And then they say, hey, God really wanted me to be on this trip. And then when they go, we just show them how easy it is to have a ministry. But short-term missions is a great leadership development tool, and we use that. For us, that's kind of the advanced placement or the top level class that we offer. And then we we'll train kids how to have their own Bible studies, small group Bible studies, just 3 or 4 week group Bible studies. We've got great materials, thrivestudies.com. Our stuff is free. You can download it.
Mm-hmm.
And they're little short studies that are learner-centered. They have the kids interacting with you. There's leaders' guides for each one of them. We've got enough for 2 years of Bible studies that we've put together. My wife's worked on that project. And they are aimed at a multi-ethnic population, and they're aimed at guys and girls. You'll see when you go to the page, they've got pictures. When you download a bunch of sheets to hand out, it's just one sheet with a big picture in the front. So it's not going to overwhelm them, and it's discussion based, and they're fun. So in our leadership development, we have kids that will lead those studies, and like last night, just simple things. I had a bunch of T-shirts that I'd made for our leaders, and I told one of them, here's my car key. They're in the front seat, and you figure out who they go to.
Mm-hmm.
We did it at the end of the meeting, so not everybody would realize that we were passing them out just to the leaders. We had them specially made. And just little things like that. Or I'll say, hey, we had a breakfast the other day, leadership breakfast, and I bought all the food, and I said, hey, why don't you just cook the bacon? And do you know how to do scrambled eggs? Yes, sir. I cook scrambled eggs every day, and had them out there on the outdoor grill, and another guy was making the toast, and another guy said, find some chairs. We're going to need 7 chairs around the table. Just little things to get them involved.
Right.
And then they feel the ownership. This is their meeting. And then I ask them, how do y'all want to run the thing this year? I said, we'll meet. We've got a location, but what do y'all want to do when we're there? And give them ownership. Get their feedback on stuff.
Well, if nothing else, I just wanted to, again, just encourage those of you that are listening to consider what you might do to develop a ministry, or to maybe get some helpful hints as you already have a ministry. And if you are looking for more help, again, we have some connections there, so you can contact Benton Hall. We have a link to, of course, his Facebook page and Twitter, as well as information about this book, Tales from the Bike Path. And if people want more information, you're quite willing to share out of 40 years of experience.
You bet.
Benton, thank you for coming in. I've known you for a long time, and just amazing. Somebody has been spending so much of his life with youth ministry, 43 years in the high school division of Cru, which is formerly known as Campus Crusade. So it's been a delight to have you in studio today.
Thank you, Kerby.
Well, we're going to take a break, and when we come back tomorrow, we'll get into some more issues. But if you find yourself saying, okay, I'd like to learn a little bit more about this, as I mentioned, we have a link to talesfromthebikepath.com. That'll be giving you a good link to Benton Hall. And also, of course, you have a link, as we've already provided, to both his Facebook page and his Twitter page. As you go to our website, pointofview.net, you're going to see all sorts of articles that we've posted here. My daily commentary, we have a Take Action section. We have some videos for you to watch. And so please take the time to use those resources. And we're encouraging you, if you've never given to Point of View before, maybe even just a gift of $5 would be a way to send an encouragement to us, and we would greatly appreciate it. Of course, you can click on that button that says Donate and help us out. I want to thank Andrew, Alisa, as well as Shamila for their help behind the scenes. Have a great day, and we will see you back here tomorrow.
If you've been a Christian for any length of time, no doubt you've heard about Jesus feeding thousands with a few loaves of bread and a couple of fish. Jesus took something small and turned it into something big. Recently, someone here at Point of View made an interesting discovery. He did some math and figured out that according to the number of faithful listeners we have, if you and every other listener gave $5, it would help Kerby and the team bring you interviews and commentary for not 3 months, but 3 years. You heard me right. If every listener donates just $5, we'd pay what it costs to bring you this needed information for 3 years. And if you urge a friend to join you, you send 5, they send 5, well, you can imagine the impact. Click the Donate Now button at pointofview.net. Pointofview.net, or send $5 to Point of View, Box 30, Dallas, Texas 75221. Box 30, Dallas 75221. Send $5. Urge a friend to join you. Support Point of View. Point of View is produced by Point of View Ministries.
I just thank God for y'all. I listen to you every day.